Hey, everybody. Mike Irizarry here from What's on Joe Mind. And
hey, Mikey.
It's time for another mail call where we open up the post sock and give some answers to the questions that you, the viewer, have sent us from the comfort of your own home. Joining me here in the top row, of course, the former head of marketing for the brand at Hasbro. It's Mark Weber.
That's what I'm talking about. Yes. And how do you spell mail call tonight? M-A-L-E, baby. It's Boys Club tonight on What's on Joe Mind.
That's not what I signed up for, guys.
Hey, man.
This Columbia shirt's not coming off, okay?
We don't care about your shirt, man. Get them pants. Anyways.
Right?
Joining us in the bottom row, Joe Colton is on assignment. So here from 3D Joe's, it's Carson Metaxas.
That's right. The OG.
What's up, guys? How y'all doing? Good to see you again. Thank you for having me.
You can't self-applaud. Come on.
It has been too long. I'm clapping for you guys, man.
Right.
Clapping for you guys.
Appreciate it.
A lot of work goes into this.
He's Southern. He's very proper. He's very well-mannered.
He's going to call us Surah.
Yes, sir. I don't know, like that whole veneer might rub off. I'm getting ready to move to New York. You might find a different Carson from 3D Joe's here in a little bit.
Think of the possibilities. You can start cutting people off in traffic.
Right?
You can start driving with your middle finger free.
Oh,
You're
man.
a real New Yorker before you know it.
He's moving so far north, he's going to be like a Canadian. He's just going from well-mannered to even more well-mannered.
It's just a dip over the pond, you know, when it's not frozen.
Tonight in the mail call, we did go to our bench. We brought Carson in for a specific purpose, in that he had the answers to a question that was asked to us. So without dipping further into the territorial nature of New York land wars, let's get to the letter.
Let's do it.
Hi, folks. Love the show. I'm not sure if this question has been asked before, but it's something that has always been in the back of my mind. Have there been any confirmed cases of released G.I. Joe figures that were originally intended to be someone different? For example, with no evidence to back it up, I am convinced that the 1991 Night Vulture figure was originally going to be a new Snake Eyes figure until they created the other 1991 Snake Eyes. It also seems to me that Dogfight was originally going to be a new Wild Bill, both pilots with red mustaches and sunglasses. Almost too much of a coincidence there. I believe Overlord was originally going to be another Cobra Commander as well. Do any of you know of any figures that maybe began life as someone else? If so, do you have any insight as to what led to the changes? Thanks for your time. Tim Peterson via email. Great question here, Tim. There's any number of situations where, yes, a character was designed to be one character and then turned into somebody else somewhere else in the process. Of course, so much of that is just lost to the ages. It happens so early in the process that there's not a name or there's not a job function connected to that character. It's just a sketch that gets churned out, and they decide not to use it for that guy, but it looks pretty good when we throw another code name on it, that sort of thing. And all that stuff it's all just, again, been lost to the ages. It happened so long ago, but there are some cases, and Carson was instrumental in pulling out this information for us, where yes, that figure got fairly far into the process before it got switched around. And Carson, why don't we let you take over here with the one that we absolutely know that Tim got right.
So, Tim, thank you for the question. Really appreciate it. It's definitely something that a lot of us collectors are very interested in. And to Mike's point, a lot of this is just lost to time, because if you think about the revisions that were made to these characters over time, if it was Ron Rudat and Kirk Bazigian in the early 80s, or if it was Mark Pennington working in the late 80s, or if it was Kurt Groen working in the early 90s, et cetera, they all were coming up with a myriad of designs, and only a very few of those designs made it through the process into engineering and sculpting and that kind of thing. So I would say for each typical character design, there was 10 that were left on the cutting room floor. And for some of those designs that went through all the way through to what we're seeing here, which is the presentation art stage, some of those might have been associated with the character, and that could be changed this late in the game. So this is Cobra Commander in his original blue and yellow deco. This is presentation art that would have been shown through to management to get approval to move into the sculpting stage. This is illustrated by Dave Dorman, who was a very popular freelance illustrator that they were using a lot around this time to create presentation art. He never did actual packaging artwork that we saw at retail, but he was probably the most prolific presentation artist for the late 80s, early 90s. So this one was actually labeled Cobra Commander, oil on board, 16 inches by 20 inches. And it shows you that that character design was intended absolutely for Cobra Commander and made it through very far through the process as Cobra Commander. Now, I will say most of the character designs, it was rare for them to include a code name. They didn't usually have the code names throughout the development process. So more often than not, they would have something that was a generic description of what that character's MOS would be or what their military specialty would be. And I just confirmed this when I was at Bill Merklein's house. He was a sculptor that sculpted 70 of the figures from 1983 to 1990. He sculpted 70 G.I. Joes, probably the single most prolific figure sculptor for the G.I. Joe line, and he was a contractor. They sent him black and white photocopies of the 360 turnarounds that showed the front, back, left, and right of each figure. He would receive figure input sheets that showed what color each piece of the plastic would be. But all of his documentation doesn't refer to downtown at all. It refers to Mortarman. And sometimes this specialty right here, Mortarman, wouldn't usually make it all the way through to what Larry Hama would put on the file card as their specialty. But in this case, it did. So I am speculating, and I have absolutely no proof of this, that Mortarman was actually short fuse. I mean, if you look at him, he's got the same MOS. He's got the same, Caucasian dude, blonde hair. He's a mortar guy. It's a natural progression for that 1982 figure. We will never know this unless we find a memo or a sculpt sheet that has the name short fuse on it. But again, the probability of that ever happening is very, very slim because throughout the production process, they were simply referring to him as Mortarman. So it's going to be very rare for us to be able to say, yes, Mortarman was intended, or downtown was intended to be short fuse, because they would have been using that working title of Mortarman all the way through the engineering process, all the way through sculpting, accessories, all that stuff. They didn't have that final code name of downtown until Larry Hama got it, and he was like he was the caboose. You know what I mean? Him writing the file cards and them creating the actual packaging, that was one of the very last steps. And so it's going to be very rare for us to see something like Mike just showed with the presentation artwork that says it was intended to be Cobra Commander.
I just wanted to put up a quick image too, that there's Overlord.
Yes, so the Cobra Commander design that we saw in the presentation artwork, that was the light blue, the dark blue, and the yellow accents, evolved into this character, which is called Overlord. And everybody knows that they started experimenting with a big bad guy. And by big, I don't mean like size-wise. I mean an important bad guy that came with a small vehicle all the way back in 1984 with Zartan. That vehicle was so extremely successful. The fact that they had this little character, this one figure with this very small vehicle, it sold buku. Zartan was incredibly popular. So they took that to mean that formula was very successful and they should repeat it. And so that's what they did. If you look at Destro version 2, for example, or Zanzibar or Overlord, this kind of repetition, or Serpentor with his air chariot in 86, I skipped right over him. They began a pattern of releasing a very important high-level senior kind of bad guy with a very small vehicle in 1984, and Overlord was just a continuation of that.
So if Overlord came out in 1990, so what's the approximate timestamp you would put on that oil painting that we saw?
1989 at the very latest.
Okay.
Yeah. These things, they had about a year production cycle, and we're starting to see this in 3D Joe's, for example. So sorry to come back to that like it's shameless plugging, but it's actually a very useful resource. So if you go to 3D Joe's right now, we got this pre-production tab, and eventually under here will be figures, and there will just be dozens of pages. But for now, here's the inside scoop to all you guys that care and want to see some pre-production stuff. If you go to a characters page, here's a little cheat, a little hack, and type in PRE, PRO, do the hyphen before it, and then hit enter. You may or you may not find an awesome pre-production page from 3D Joe's and Joe Declassified. We've been working behind the scenes. We got about 60 pages ready to go, and we're going to slow roll these out. So those of you that don't have the patience to wait, you can just go in and type in hyphen pre-pro and see if there's anything ready. But for example, with Snake Eyes, This was the first version of Snake Eyes that we know of. And again, other sketches could emerge, other information. None of this information is ever locked in stone. And that's like my talking point number one when it comes to pre-production. Nobody knows everything when it comes to pre-production. We're always discovering new stuff. Everybody's got access to different stuff. So this is an example of Snake Eyes. This was May 26th, 1981. And then you can see how he's got the open face mask right there, just at the bottom. He's got the mustache. It's much more of like a Zorro look. There's also revisions to like the webbing gear that he's got on. And then this one was July 28th, 1981. So he was working on this the summer of 1981. And we all know that, you know, he was rolled out in 1982. So I'd say at the bare minimum, these figures were developed at least a year in advance. Some of these ideas took a lot longer to come to fruition than just a calendar year. Some of them started much earlier than that. All right. So this was one of the most interesting and puzzling ones. I think I actually went out to the community with this. We were working on restoring this box art for the Collecting the Art of G.I. Joe series. And I was like, who in the heck is that guy manning the gun on the back far side? He doesn't look like any other character from the DEF. So most people know the DEF was only around for 1 year, and they canceled it, and they rolled. That was 1992, the year that it actually existed. In 1993, they were developing an all new set of figures and some vehicles for the DEF. They produced television commercials and box art that actually shows the DEF logos on it. And they had this one mystery character, and I just wasn't able to piece it together in looking at what was actually released as the Battle Corps, because all these DEF figures that were new for 93 were just rolled into Battle Corps. But if you look at Battle Corps, you don't see this guy with this green outfit and this little man bun in the Battle Corps. So my friend Chris Murray from Joe Declassified actually surfaced some drawings that were pre-production drawings of a much earlier version of Mace. And Mace was intended to be a kind of an undercover drug dealer type, a la Miami Vice. And that's why he's got this green suit, which is mostly blocked by that little spotlight there. It's a green suit with shoulder pads, a la Miami Vice. Everybody that knows Miami Vice from back in the day remembers how popular kind of suits with shoulder pads were. So that is a version of Mace that was an undercover kind of drug dealer guy that was intended to be with DEF. So one of the things that I believe was revealed in the paperwork was that this was actually intended to be a sequel for Chuckles, which makes perfect sense, right? Chuckles was the undercover guy from 1987. If you're going to have an undercover drug lord kind of guy from the G.I. Joe team, it would totally make sense that it's the next evolution of Chuckles. Again, you got a Caucasian guy with blonde hair. He just grew out a man bun and threw on a little suit with some shoulder pads. So that was one of those fun things to kind of discover through reaching out to the community and seeing what paperwork people have and trying to solve that mystery.
Better future as the guy with the helmet missile.
Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
I couldn't resist the opportunity to get helmet missile into this presentation.
It does kind of beg the question, given the garish nature of the original Chuckles, and now what we've seen as Chuckles V2 that got moved sideways. How bad was Chuckles V3 going to be? Right? Like pink jumpsuit or
Mega Marines.
Yeah, that bio armor. That's what we're talking.
I mean, yeah, in some respects, we should be grateful that they didn't take some of these later designs and put some of our favorite characters' names on them, you know, because if you would have called this guy Chuckles, I would have wondered how in the heck that was Chuckles.
I'm going to call this guy neck injury. That's what I'm going to.
Yeah.
Or instant beheading.
Right.
Along the same lines, there were lots of characters that had changes made that didn't get to this stage, or parts of the process that were discussed. And Carson, you also brought up, you also sent along some images of some memos.
Yes.
That were sent along by Larry Hama himself.
That's right. So one of the things that Larry Hama has talked about in some of the interviews that I've done with him previously is how enormous a task it was to be tasked with keeping track of up to 17 figures per year just from the main line, not counting drivers, not counting subgroups. If you look at G.I. Joe through the 80s, oftentimes they were producing 17 mainline carded figures with unique bios, right? And imagine doing that every year and trying to keep continuity in the comic book, introducing 17 new characters plus drivers plus subgroups, and still having some relevance for these older characters that you built a huge audience around. You weren't going to put Scarlet away because it was 1984 and you were moving on to new characters. Like Scarlet was going to stick around a little bit. Same with, characters like Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, but those characters, luckily, since they were guys and they were popular ninjas, they got re-released. But one of the things that was, I'll call it this, I'll call it a point of contention between Larry Hama and the Hasbro managers that were managing his book. He had to get approvals from them to do certain things. And when he was writing these bio cards, these dossiers that were distilled down to file cards, he didn't have carte blanche, really. He had to work through an editor. And originally that was Kirk Bazigian in the earliest years. That was Kirk Bazigian. But Kirk moved on and was doing Play School Baby. He was doing Hasbro Direct. Kirk went and did several other things from 85 to around 89. So Larry was working with some other folks. And so this dossier was written in 1985. I don't believe that this question was posited to Kirk. I think it was posited to whoever was managing it at that time. But basically, Larry is making the case here that why are you guys overcomplicating G.I. Joe and the universe of G.I. Joe by creating brand new distinct personalities and characters every single year, when in fact you could take some of our previous characters that we've already done all this world building and character and personality development around and make them evolve as a character, and that would be your new toy that you're getting ready to release. So what he's making the request for here is that he's writing the 1985 series of file cards or dossiers, and he's talking about Footloose here, who's the infantry man. Again, he hasn't been named Footloose yet because Larry's the one that's going to name him Footloose, but he's referred to as infantry man. And the alternate names, look at that right there. You got Bravo and Grunt. And the asterisk is, isn't this guy just a do-over of Grunt? If Grunt's being phased out, or to be more precise, the Grunt figure is being phased out, then why can't the character remain the same and just acquire the new wardrobe like Snake Eyes? Because Snake Eyes version 2 was coming out this year as well. Sure. So Larry's making the case with Hasbro, come on guys, don't make me make up new personalities and new backstories and new code names and new file names and new serial numbers and all that good stuff for all 17 of these figures. And to be fair, I think Larry had a very valid point here. I think if you go to the next slide, though, you might see that he lost. Snake Eyes is already being re-outfitted. The Desert Trooper, who we know is Dusty, the Fireman, who we know is Barbecue, and the Hostile Environment Trooper, who we know is Airtight, could all be retrained and re-outfitted Joes from the first run. Let's pause right here and just hypothesize, who do we think would have been the Desert Trooper? Let me show you something. All right, let's slide down to this beautiful card art. And let's slide down to this beautiful card art. And what do you see there?
Oh, yeah. Same pose.
Same exact pose. Why couldn't that just be Grunt ready for desert combat? So if the Desert Trooper, he could have easily been Grunt. I don't know who Barbecue would have been. I mean, it could have been Blowtorch, but they're like diametrically opposed. One burns things and the other one puts them out.
Right? Barbecue, or rather Blowtorch, would have still been available on the shelf.
Yeah, so. He would have 84 to 85. You're right. Hostile Environment Trooper, I don't know who that would have been. Maybe Sci-Fi, or not Sci-Fi, maybe Flash could have gotten interested in another technology.
That's the where you have to think of, like maybe it's Flash, maybe it's Grand Slam. You think maybe Bazooka should have been Zap.
Yes, absolutely. Zap to Bazooka is a natural, especially when you think of the original Zap character design called for a mustache, right? So then that leap from Zap to Bazooka, Zap with a mustache to Bazooka with a mustache is really just, okay, he became a Steve Grogan fan and threw on a Patriots jersey and it's still Zap. So anyway, he was basically making the case that these guys were all retrained and re-outfitted Joes from the first run. There's a precedence for this. The Luke Skywalker figure in the Star Wars universe was released in different configurations to match the costume variations between the various sequels. So he's even saying, hey, look, Kenner did this with Star Wars. Can we do this with G.I. Joe? Which I thought was an interesting tactic and maybe didn't work in his favor to compare him.
That's probably why it didn't work in his favor.
Yeah, don't compare Hasbro to the competition if you're trying to win this debate. But and so then he had to handwrite in on this. If I can get a decision on this ASAP, I can either update the old dossiers to keep them the same characters or come up with new ones. in either case, we need a list of all phased out Joes. And that last line is the most interesting to me. He's basically asking them, hey, if there's not going to be toys on the shelves for these guys, and if these new file cards aren't going to be updated versions of those guys, well, then can we just phase them out? And I don't think Hasbro went for either of those offerings. They definitely didn't say, yes, let's just make these retrained versions of the old Joes. We got all unique characters. And they definitely didn't really let them phase things out.
No. If you think back to the Sunbow cartoon, a lot of the characters that had been phased out of the shelves, the 1982 characters, and in some cases, some of the guys from 83, Airborne and Doc and Tripwire, they were still showing up in the Sunbow media.
Were they showing up as cameos, or were they showing up as dialogue?
No, they were showing up as actual characters. I always, Rob and I have a joke going that every time I turn it on YouTube, it's Operation Mind Menace, because it's just such a silly episode, but I have to watch it because it's the Flash episode.
Right.
It's the only episode where he has speaking lines.
Right.
And he's a major part of it. And the other major character in that one is Airborne.
Mm-hmm.
So there's plenty of instances where there's a main character in an episode of the show that doesn't have a figure on the shelves. A lot of times it's Scarlet, who was already gone from shelves, and she was all over that first season of the cartoon.
I agree. And I think that's because they had a real shortage of estrogen in the line in general.
Sure.
And so they had to use the females. It's even worse if you go to the Deke series. They're using Baroness and Lady J, who hadn't been on shelves for 5 or 6 years at that point, right? Because they have no female characters to use. Zorana is still heavily featured in the Deke series. So the women they had a much longer longevity in the cartoons.
I don't know if any of them are heavily featured in the Deke series, but they show up at any rate.
They're there frequently.
Yeah,
they're in a lot of episodes. They might not have a lot of lines, but they have a lot of episodes.
And they all liked shopping. Anyways, that's it. That's what we've got for the answer there. So we gave answers where we could. If you have more light to shed on this, and there's certainly a good chance that you do, get a hold of us. We've got our email down below, whatsonjoemind@gmail.com. Don't be afraid to reach out to us. We're more than happy to get you involved in the process if you have answers that we don't. Thank you so much, Carson. Thank you so much for joining us. We couldn't have done this one without you.
Happy to be here, guys. Always happy to spend some time with my family at What's on Joe Mind. And I would say to the community out there, this paperwork, it's 30 years old. It's 40 years old. It's so distributed. It's so in the wind at this point that, oftentimes posting something like that DEF box and saying, who's this guy in the green suit? Chris Murray knew that. He just hadn't shared it in a way that I had been able to catch it and digest it. And so I think one of our goals at 3D Joe's with building these pre-production pages is that they'll be posted in perpetuity for everybody to discover at their leisure and free of cost. So if you're interested in contributing to the 3D Joe's pre-production archives, reach out. We'll do the work. We'll put it out there for everybody to enjoy, and we'll help preserve the history of G.I. Joe.
Absolutely. As with any mystery, a lot of times the questions don't get answered because nobody hears the question being asked. And so if we just broadcast the questions enough, you know what? We'll find the answers to a lot more mysteries. But that's all we got for tonight. For my guest hosts, Carson Metaxas, for my regular host, Mark Weber. He's been quiet over there today.
Right? I'm just taking it all in.
He was active in the pre-show.
I wore myself out.
He's working the room in the pre-show.
It was all that White Castle talk.
I'm telling you.
I'm Mike Irizarry. Thanks so much for joining us here on What's on Joe Mind Mail Call. We'll catch you next time. Have a great rest of the night.
Stretch it out. Shake it off, Mikey.
Right?
Okay.
That's going in the gag reel at the end.